Okay, let's unpack this. The moon, our closest celestial neighbor, has, well, it's always captivated us, hasn't it? It's inspired poets, scientists, and yes, it's even fueled some truly astonishing theories. For today's deep dive, you've shared with us a fascinating stack of sources all about lunar facts and the really intriguing world of conspiracy theories surrounding the Apollo missions, our mission. To thoroughly explore the facts and fictions around that enduring question, what exactly might NASA be hiding from us on the moon, specifically regarding those historic Apollo landings? We're going to sort through the noise, giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed.
It's a great question. And what's immediately fascinating is how much we already know about the moon, even just from simple observation here on Earth. We can see about 59% of its surface from here. But that part we don't see. The far side, well, it was successfully photographed by the Soviet Luna 3 way back in 1959. That alone tells us lunar exploration began quite some time ago, long before humans ever set foot there.
So we've been looking at it for a long time, trying to figure out what's really up there. Those dark patches we call lunar seas, for
Right.
example, or earthbound intuition made us think water, but it was far from it, right?
Exactly. We now know those are vast plains of dark volcanic rock. Basaltic lava is the geological term from ancient eruptions billions of years ago, and the moon's mountains. They weren't formed by shifting plates like ours, but primarily by these massive meteorite impacts over eons. It's a powerful reminder, really, of how easily our assumptions can be challenged once we get a closer look, once we actually go there or send probes.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Apollo program. It wasn't just about space exploration. It was this monumental effort by the U.S. right in the middle of the fierce space race with the USSR. President Kennedy's ambitious goal in 1961 was to land a man on the moon before the decade was out, which was incredibly ambitious. This involved an unbelievable investment, billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of people working on it, culminating in Neil Armstrong's historic first steps in 1969, a moment that, for many, defined human ingenuity.
Absolutely. A huge national project.
But almost as soon as the dust settled on those first steps, whispers of doubt began. The idea of a lunar conspiracy really exploded in 1976 with Bill Kaysing's book, We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion swindle. He argued the technology just wasn't there, that it was all faked. And this theory gained traction in a climate of, well, intense public skepticism in America, following things like the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. Trust in institutions was pretty low then.
Yeah, that context is crucial. It created fertile ground for these kinds of narratives to take root. And if we look at the broader context of these theories, many of them latch onto perceived inconsistencies in the official photos and videos. You know the ones. Classic arguments include claims that the American flag appeared to wave in the vacuum of space,
Right, the waving flag, that's a big one.
a striking absence of stars in photographs, shadows that didn't seem to align correctly, and astronauts' jumps appearing too low for the moon's reduced gravity.
It wasn't just about the pictures, though, was it? Some theorists raise really fundamental questions about the very possibility of the mission at that time, arguing the underlying technology simply wasn't robust enough.
Absolutely. Concerns about the Van Allen radiation belts, for instance, were a persistent theme. Theorists claim they posed a deadly, unavoidable threat to astronauts. There was also genuine doubt expressed that a powerful enough rocket, like the Saturn V or the complex technology for a manned mission, actually existed back then. Some even suggested maybe unmanned probes were used instead, perhaps to collect the samples, if anything.
And then there's that really persistent, almost cinematic theory.
Ah, yes, the Kubrick
Yeah.
theory. That the entire event was a brilliant studio production, maybe even directed by Stanley Kubrick, given his groundbreaking work on 2001, A Space Odyssey. These weren't just simple doubts, they were often quite elaborate, detailed narratives explaining how it could have been faked.
Okay, so we have these compelling stories and these apparent visual and technical anomalies. Let's unpack these claims one by one and see what the science and our sources actually reveal. Let's start with those visual mysteries.
Yeah.
The waving flag, missing stars, and misaligned shadows. To me, these felt like pretty strong arguments until you dig a bit deeper.
They do feel strong initially, and that's often because our earthbound intuition, shaped by atmosphere and diffuse light, just misinterprets phenomena in the vacuum of space. The waving flag is a prime example. It wasn't wind, obviously, there's no air. The flag was mounted on a rigid pole with a telescopic horizontal crossbar pushed out to make it appear extended, like it was flying, and the fabric itself was folded tightly for transport, creating natural creases and ripples.
Ah, so the wrinkles made it look like it was waving.
Exactly. And crucially, without air resistance, any small movement or vibration when they planted it would simply dampen much, much slower than on Earth. So it might have oscillated a bit initially, making it look like it was waving in a breeze when it was actually just settling down in a vacuum. Plus, recent photogrammetric analysis, where they merge multiple photos, confirms the flag's fixed static shape once it was set up.
Okay, so it's our expectation of how a flag should behave on Earth, not what was actually happening there. Makes sense. And what about the missing stars that some claim prove it was a studio backdrop? That one always made me wonder.
Well, the scientific explanation is actually quite straightforward. Think about taking a picture outside at night with a bright flash. The lunar surface and the astronauts' white spacesuits were brilliantly illuminated by the direct, unfiltered sun. It was incredibly bright. The cameras used relatively short exposure times, which were perfectly suited to capture these bright foreground objects, the astronauts, the lander, the surface itself. But these short exposures simply weren't long enough to pick up the very faint light from distant stars in the black background. Ah, okay. So the foreground was just too bright, essentially blowing out the faint background stars, like trying to see stars during the daytime on Earth.
Precisely. It's a standard photographic principle, not evidence of a fake backdrop.
That makes sense. And those misaligned shadows, or shadows that weren't absolutely pitch black, another common point of contention.
Right. On the moon, the sun is essentially the only significant light source, and it acts like a distant, intense pinpoint. With no atmosphere to scatter light like here on Earth, shadows are incredibly sharp and distinct, very dark. However, the lunar terrain isn't flat. It's very uneven, with lots of craters, rocks, and hills. This naturally creates varying shadow lengths and directions depending on the local topography. Also, the lunar soil itself, the regolith, isn't perfectly black. It actually reflects a small percentage of sunlight, maybe 5 to 18%.
So there is some ambient light bouncing around. A little bit, yes. Enough to subtly illuminate areas in shadow, preventing them from being completely, absolutely black. You could still see some detail in them. And finally, the wide-angle lenses used on the Apollo cameras can introduce perspective distortions. This can make parallel lines, like the edges of shadows from objects far apart, appear to diverge or converge in a 2D photo. That could certainly be confusing if you're not accounting for the lens effect and the uneven ground.
Okay, so the visual anomalies seem to have solid scientific explanations tied to the unique lunar environment and the equipment used. But what about the physical limitations? Why didn't astronauts jump much higher in reduced lunar gravity? Some claimed they should have been leaping meters high.
Yeah, that's another common one. It wasn't really about the potential jump height due to lower gravity, but more about practical limitations and, frankly, safety. Astronauts were encumbered by those bulky, pressurized spacesuits. They added significant mass, maybe over 80 kilograms on Earth. And the suits created friction in the joints, making rapid or large movements difficult and tiring. But more importantly, maintaining balance was critical. High jumps carried a significant risk of falling.
Falling over in that suit could be really bad, right?
Extremely bad. You risk damaging the life support system on your back, the PLSS unit. For instance, on Apollo 16, astronaut Charles Duke actually talked about a moment of panic when he tried to jump, fell backward, and luckily didn't damage his backpack. The highest recorded jump was around 81 centimeters, which
Yeah.
was actually quite a feat under those restrictive and potentially dangerous conditions. They weren't there to set high jump records.
Right, survival and mission objectives came first.
Yeah.
And the big one, the radiation belts. The idea that crossing the Van Allen belts would have been a death sentence.
The Van Allen belts were definitely a serious concern for deep space travel. NASA knew that. They contain high-energy charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field. But as our sources show, the Apollo command modules had adequate radiation protection built in. The walls had a certain thickness and material composition, effectively equivalent to about a 3-centimeter thick aluminum shield, which offers significant protection. And the flight trajectory through these belts was also carefully chosen. They went through quickly and avoided the most intense radiation zones.
So they planned the route carefully.
Very carefully. And the actual measured radiation doses received by the astronauts were remarkably low.
They ranged from 0.18 to 1.14 rad per mission, well below the maximum permissible dose set for astronauts at the time, which was around 50 rad.
Even Soviet Zond missions, which flew unmanned spacecraft with biological payloads like turtles around the moon and through the belts, confirmed that radiation conditions are not dangerous for humans during periods of quiet solar activity. They measured doses around 3.5 rad.
So the Soviets confirmed it was survivable too.
Yes. Now, it is worth noting, a 26 study suggested Apollo astronauts might have had a higher rate of cardiovascular disease mortality later in life, possibly linked to deep space radiation exposure. But this speaks to potential subtle, long-term cumulative effects, not the idea of immediate fatal exposure during the mission itself, which the shielding and trajectory prevented.
Okay, that clears that up. But it brings us to another persistent claim, the lost technology argument. If we went then, why isn't it easy to just go back now? Surely we haven't lost the blueprints?
Well, our sources explain this as largely an economic and logistical issue, not necessarily a lost blueprint issue in the simple sense. The Saturn V Super Heavy rocket was a monstrously complex and expensive machine. The program involved thousands of specialized contractors and a budget that, in today's money, would be absolutely astronomical. When the Apollo program ended, the funding dried up. Many of those specialized contractors went out of business or moved on. The assembly lines were dismantled. So while blueprints might exist somewhere, the specific tooling, the manufacturing processes, and crucially, the collective human expertise distributed across all those companies effectively dissolved.
So it's the whole ecosystem that's gone.
Precisely. Figures like Dmitry Rogozin, the former head of Roscosmos, have actually echoed this sentiment. He noted that once a generation of engineers moves on, the specific capability to achieve such complex goals can simply disappear. It's not that the fundamental physics or engineering knowledge is lost, it's that rebuilding that specific industrial capacity and specialized workforce from scratch is incredibly expensive and time-consuming.
All right, it wasn't just one company building one thing. Okay. And what about that famous theory linking Stanley Kubrick to the whole thing? It's such a fascinating idea, the director of 2001 secretly filming the moon landing.
It's a very popular cultural idea. It captures the imagination, but it's historically inaccurate based on what we know. Kubrick lived and worked primarily in the UK from the early 1960s onwards. He directed all his major films there. And notably, he had a well-known, quite severe fear of flying. This makes his direct, secret involvement in a massive U.S. government project requiring travel, likely to secure locations like Nevada deserts, highly improbable.
And that film people sometimes point to.
Ah, you mean Dark Side of the Moon, the documentary. That was actually a very cleverly made mockumentary.
Good.
Its creator later explicitly confirmed it was a hoax designed to play on conspiracy tropes. It used actors and took quotes out of context. It's really a testament to the power of filmmaking and storytelling, but it's not factual evidence of Kubrick's involvement in a real hoax.
Okay. Finally, before we move to the positive proof, there was that incident with a piece of lunar soil in a Dutch museum, wasn't there, that turned out to be petrified wood. That certainly fueled a lot of the speculation.
It did, yes, that story got a lot of attention around 2009, but it was quite an isolated and specific case. That particular piece came from the private collection of a former Dutch prime minister. It had been given to him personally by the U.S. ambassador back in 1969, just weeks after Apollo 11 returned. It's considered highly unlikely it was ever an official NASA-controlled sample, which were, and are, meticulously cataloged and handled under strict protocols.
So it was more like a diplomatic gift that got mislabeled or misrepresented somewhere along the line.
That seems the most probable explanation. This single anomaly, while certainly intriguing and maybe embarrassing for the museum, doesn't really cast doubt on the authenticity of the vast majority of the actual official lunar samples. The hundreds of kilograms brought back by Apollo that have been extensively studied and verified by scientists worldwide for decades. It highlights the importance of provenance, the chain of custody, for scientific samples.
Right. Okay, so we've systematically addressed many of the primary arguments raised by the skeptics. But beyond just debunking the myths, what irrefutable evidence do we actually have that the moon landings were real? What stands as undeniable proof?
Well, the lunar rock samples themselves are perhaps the strongest, most tangible piece of evidence. You just can't argue with geology sometimes. 6 Apollo missions collectively brought back an impressive 382 kilograms. That's about 842 pounds of lunar soil and rocks. For context, all the Soviet automated Luna missions combined brought back about 300 grams. And China's recent Change 5 mission, a major success, brought back about 1.7 kilograms. The Apollo return wasn't just a handful of pebbles, it's a vast, diverse geological collection from multiple sites.
And what makes those specific samples so convincing, beyond just the sheer amount?
Crucially, these samples have been meticulously analyzed by hundreds, probably thousands, of independent scientists in laboratories all across the globe for over 50 years now. Even during the height of the Cold War, Soviet geochemists and planetary scientists who had their own small lunar samples from their lunar probes for comparison rigorously analyzed the Apollo samples provided to them. and they found no discrepancies. They confirmed the American samples were genuinely lunar.
Wow, even the Soviets confirmed it during the Cold War. That is pretty powerful.
Absolutely. Furthermore, unique minerals were discovered in the Apollo samples. Things like armalcolite, named after Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, pyroxferrate, and tranquility, named after the Sea of Tranquility. These minerals had never been found on Earth before Apollo. You simply can't fake that level of unique, complex geological and isotopic composition. It unequivocally confirms their extraterrestrial, specifically lunar, origin.
Okay, the rocks are solid evidence. What other independent confirmations do we have? Was anyone else watching?
Oh, yes. The sheer volume of independent verification is truly fascinating, especially considering the era. From the very beginning, Soviet military and scientific ground tracking stations were actively monitoring the Apollo missions. They had a specially created control radio complex in Simferopol, Crimea, specifically for this. They tracked missions like Apollo 8, 10, 11, and 12, confirming their trajectories towards the moon and intercepting their radio communications with Earth. Also, observatories in other countries, like Germany and Italy, independently picked up the radio signals coming from the Apollo spacecraft on the moon or in lunar orbit. This wasn't some secret mission hidden from the world. The world was listening in.
So multiple nations were tracking them in real time. And the evidence isn't just historical, it's still ongoing, right? There's stuff still up there.
Absolutely. A key piece of physical evidence still actively used today is the array of laser retroreflectors placed on the moon by the astronauts of Apollo 11, 14, and 15. These are essentially sophisticated mirrors. They are passive devices, needing no power. Scientists on Earth from various countries, including the US, France, Germany, Italy, and even China recently, can fire powerful lasers at these reflectors. By precisely timing the return journey of the laser pulses, they can measure the Earth-Moon distance with incredible accuracy, down to millimeters. Their continued operation from those specific Apollo landing sites is an irrefutable testament to human presence and activity at those locations. You had to be there to put them down.
So we have physical objects left on the moon which we can still interact with using lasers from Earth. Well, what about actual pictures of the landing sites taken more recently?
Yes, in recent decades, new generations of sophisticated lunar orbiters from multiple space agencies have provided clear photographic confirmation. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, launched in 2009, has produced stunningly high-resolution images of all the Apollo landing sites. You can clearly see the descent stages of the lunar modules, the scientific equipment left behind, the ALSET packages, tracks left by the lunar rovers on later missions, and even the faint paths of astronaut footprints in the undisturbed lunar dust.
Wow, you can actually see the footprints.
Yes, in the best LRO images. And critically, it's not just NASA confirming its own missions. Spacecraft from other nations, including Japan's Kaguya orbiter, India's Chandrayaan-1 and Chandrayaan-2 orbiters, and China's Chang'e-2 orbiter, have also captured independent images confirming the presence of the Apollo landing sites and the hardware left behind. These are independent eyes in the sky, from rival and friendly space programs alike, all seeing the same evidence on the lunar surface.
That's a huge amount of visual data from different sources. And I understand there's even more modern analysis being done on the original Apollo photos that further solidifies the case.
That's right. Perhaps one of the most compelling and technically sophisticated modern proofs comes from advanced photogrammetric analysis. Russian specialists, for instance, using powerful software like Agisoft Metashape software, often used for creating highly accurate 3D maps and models from photographs, have applied it to the original Apollo mission photos. This technique allows them to create incredibly precise, mathematically verified 3D models of the lunar surface scenes depicted in the photos. They can reconstruct the landscape, the lander, the rocks, the equipment, all in 3 dimensions just from the 2D images. And this analysis confirms the physical realities of the scenes, everything from the fixed, unchanging shape of the flag once deployed to the accurate representation of known lunar craters and specific rock samples later collected.
So the photos themselves contain consistent 3D information.
Exactly. The scientists conclude that creating such a vast volume of fake images, thousands of photos across 6 missions, with that level of internal geometric consistency, perfectly matching lunar lighting conditions, perspective, and even subtle gravitational effects on dust, would have been utterly impossible with the technology available in the 1960s or even decades later. The sheer computational power required to convincingly fake that much consistent 3D data just didn't exist.
Okay, so Given this absolute mountain of independently verified, multifaceted scientific evidence, from the unique lunar rocks to the Soviet tracking,
Right.
the laser reflectors still working, multiple nation satellite images, and this sophisticated 3D photo analysis, why? Why does the theory that it was all fake still persist for so many people?
That really is the crucial question, isn't it? It speaks volumes about belief in information in the modern age.
We've truly taken a deep dive today, haven't we? From the fundamental facts about our moon, through the intricate arguments of the conspiracy theories, and finally looking at the overwhelming scientific and independent evidence that firmly supports the reality of the Apollo missions. It seems abundantly clear these missions were a monumental achievement, verified through multiple scientific avenues and by nations across the globe, even, as you said, former rivals during the Cold War.
And yet, despite that evidence, it's worth noting that public opinion can still diverge significantly from the scientific consensus. Our sources indicate that, historically at least, a substantial portion of the population in some countries, like Russia, for example, has expressed belief in the hoax narrative. Although it's also true that top Russian officials like Vladimir Putin and former Roscosmos head Dmitry Rogozin have publicly dismissed the hoax theory as complete nonsense and explicitly stated they believed the landings were real.
So even where public skepticism might be higher, official acknowledgement is there.
Generally, yes. Though, as a point of nuance, more recently, in November 2024, Russian cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev did make comments suggesting some Apollo footage might have included studio shots. His implications seem to lean more towards potential dramatization or filming of certain non-critical segments, rather than suggesting the entire landing was faked. It's a subtle point, but adds another layer to the ongoing discussion within the broader context of the verified events.
Interesting. It's just a fascinating example of how powerful a compelling narrative can be, even when faced with such overwhelming counter-evidence.
Indeed. It really highlights that the persistence of these kinds of theories isn't always, or even usually, about a simple lack of evidence being available. It's often more about how information is encountered, how it's processed, who we trust, and how critically it's evaluated. Or sometimes not evaluated. It underscores the profound importance, now more than ever, of scrutinizing sources, actively seeking out verifiable data, and understanding the rigorous scientific process, the debates, the peer review, the replication that underpins our knowledge of the universe. True understanding thrives not just on asking questions, which is vital, but also on the willingness to accept well-established, rigorously proven facts, even if they challenge a narrative we find appealing.
So, thinking about all this, what stands out to you about how easily narratives, even ones thoroughly debunked by science and layers of independent verification, can take hold and genuinely influence public understanding? And what does this whole episode tell us about our ongoing journey to not just understand the moon, but maybe also to navigate the vast and sometimes very confusing universe of information right here around us?
That's the thought to leave people with. Don't be afraid to keep digging, keep asking critical questions, but also keep exploring the incredible universe of actual knowledge that's available to you. The real wonders out there, discovered through genuine exploration and science, are truly amazing. And ultimately, the truth discovered through that process is almost always more fascinating, more complex, and more rewarding than any fiction,